So in this video, we're going to be looking at how to perform the deadlift, or sometimes called the conventional deadlift. Now, this version of the deadlift is often used in general resistance programs, powerlifting, and strength conditioning programs alike. Now, before we look at the actual exercise, let's review some of the muscles that we're going to be targeting throughout this lift. Now, with the deadlift, we're actually targeting hip extension, back extension, and to a slight component, knee extension. Now, the back is actually going to extend to lift the bar off the ground until reaching the level of the knees, where the hips are then going to extend to bring the hips into the bar. The erector spinae and the deep spinal muscles will be the primary component that are actually aiding in back extension. The hips are going to extend via the glutes, and the knees traditionally really extend secondary to hip extension. Now, one thing I want to note while we're talking about this is the difference between the conventional deadlift and the clean. Now, both movements look very similar, but are fundamentally different, and in my opinion, should not be taught at the same time. So when taking a look at the difference between the deadlift and the clean, is to note that the difference at the axis of rotation. The axis of rotation is where the movement occurs around that joint. Now, when taking a look at where the axis of rotation is during the deadlift, it's actually through the pelvis, where the back is going to extend from the pelvis, and then the pelvis drives forward into the bar. Now, this is a little different than the axis of rotation during the clean, because the axis of rotation during the clean is actually a major component is via the ankles. So the first part of the clean, where we extend the back to start to drive that bar off the ground, well, we bend around the ankle joint, where the knees translate posteriorly to get out of the way as the bar moves upward. Then, as soon as the bar passes the level of the knee, we quickly bend and to go into more of a dorsiflexion via the ankle to get underneath that bar as quickly as possible to allow for that upward rotation, or that upward movement. Now, as the weight shifts forward onto the foot, it will also put more emphasis on the midfoot and then subsequently the forefoot to allow us to push through the ground using our quads to lift ourselves up. So the difference in these two movements will change which muscles will assist and allow for this movement. So for example, when looking at the deadlift, it's actually much more posterior chain. That's not to say that the clean is not posterior chain, but we do get a significant portion actually occurring through the quads, and that's going to be in the anterior chain component. So keep in mind they are similar, but they are virtually fundamentally different in almost every way. Now that that's been cleared up, let's take a look at what the movement should look like with perfect technique. So when walking up to the bar for the first time, we want to position the bar so it's just over the midfoot. Now this is going to be roughly about 2 inches from the shins, and we're going to note that when looking down. Now, key thing is, if you are the athlete looking down, we want to make sure that we don't transfer our weight backwards, because as doing so, that's going to bring the shin further away from the bar. The next thing we want to do is we want to bend via the hips and trying to keep our spine in a neutral position throughout. So doing so, we're going to bring the hips back, and where we're going to try to reach down for the bar. Now, when reaching down for the bar, the shoulders are going to be slightly in front of the bar, or the bar should be directly underneath your armpits. Now, as you go to lift the bar, you want to extend at the pelvis, okay, to lift that bar up until we get to that level of the knees, and then we are actually going to remain, so we want to maintain the spine in this neutral throughout the whole time, okay? And we also want to make sure that we're keeping the bar as close to the body as possible via activation of those lats. Now, as the bar, again, as it approaches that level of the knees, what we want to do from here, this hip, is we want to drive that forward into the bar, where the final component of the deadlift is actually completed via the glutes or via hip extension from the glutes, not hyperextension in the back. Now, this is actually best seen when looking at an athlete from the side. okay? Because this is where we're going to be able to see a lot of those common compensations. And the biggest one is really where the bar gets a little too far away from us, or we end up hyperextending at the low back rather than driving and finishing that movement up with the glutes. Now, there are many compensations that we can see with this, but one thing we want to make sure is anytime we are picking up anything off the ground, we want to keep that weight as close to us as possible. That's going to put a lot less stress on a lot of the structures in the low back, and with less stress, we will be able to use a lot of the strength and the muscles to actually lift more weight, do it correctly, do it safely for a long-lasting lifting career.